studies have shown a weird thing about the human brain. Once we have formed an initial belief about something, it's very difficult to change our minds, even if we're presented with hard facts to the contrary. This explains, I guess, why there was such shock and dismay at the Olympics when the American men's basketball team lost its opening game to France. So many fans have been trained to believe that Team USA is largely invincible when it comes to Olympic basketball. They haven't quite processed all the hard facts that led up to yesterday's loss, even if the warning signs have been there in plain sight. I mean, for the past 3 years, neither the NBA's MVP award nor the Defensive Player of the Year award has gone to an American. That should have been a pretty good indication on where things stand in terms of the global spread of the game. The skill gap between U.S. players and players born elsewhere just simply nowhere near as large as it used to be, a reality that comes with some irony. The whole reason USA Basketball created the Dream Team back in '92 was because the rest of the world was starting to catch up with the American college players we used to send to the Olympics. Except then the pros on that Dream Team became such a sensation they jump-started basketball's popularity globally, which led to more athletes in other countries picking up the sport and becoming players who are now catching up to the American players we send to the Olympics. Sort of a Terminator robot arm paradox thing there, but I digress because it's not just that other countries have been catching up. There's another hard fact here, that our country was not able to enter this year's Olympic tournament with any kind of consistency. Here are some of the things that happened during Team USA's 2-week training camp that was supposed to prepare them for Tokyo. One player got hurt, one contracted COVID, 2 more went into contact tracing, 3 more weren't there at all because they were still competing in the NBA Finals. One of the team's practices had only 6 healthy players. One of the team's exhibition games was canceled entirely. So yeah, not a total shock that when the group finally did get to Tokyo, they did not look cohesive facing a French team that featured Rudy Gobert, Nicolas Batum, and Evan Fournier, whose last name I will remind you yet again to never Google. Seriously. Anyway, Team USA still managed to be up 7 with less than 4 minutes to go in this game. Particularly impressive was Drew Holiday, who had been drinking champagne on the streets of Milwaukee less than 4 days earlier. He went 18-7-4 off the bench. But Kevin Durant spent much of the game battling foul trouble, and a number of other guys simply looked out of sorts on both ends of the court. In fact, after a halftime demonstration in which a robot showed off its range, there were snarky internet calls to see if the robot could suit up for the Americans, especially once this sequence happened at the end of the game. Take a look. Team USA down 2 and yet gets off 5. Yep, count them. 5 shots at the hoop, including these wide-open threes from Zach LaVine, KD, and Holiday. None of them fell. Meanwhile, Fournier, never Google, was drilling this 3 to help lead France onto a 16-2 run to close out the game. It was the Americans' first loss in Olympic competition in 17 years. And it will likely be its last loss for at least a little bit. Team USA's other 2 opponents in this opening round-robin stage are Iran and the Czech Republic. Still, the hard facts tell us that even if and when Team USA does get to the medal stage, no one should be expecting a gimme path to the gold. After all, there are hard facts that say otherwise, even if our human brains don't always acknowledge them. So, gentlemen, you know we have a segment for the type of loss Team USA had yesterday. It is called Panic or Patience. So, Mark Spears, starting with you, is it panic or patience time for Team USA after losing that game that does count?
Well, my brain hasn't been convinced either. I'm going with patience. Just from what you said, like these guys haven't had a ton of time together.
Look at that nice music, that
having
patience
France
music.
in the first game is extremely difficult. And, they got these gimmies, and I think they'll be fine. Relax. They'll be fine. It's the chemistry, obviously, is a big issue. I think they're letting Pop's coaching and structure get into their head from what I've been hearing. But I think they're fine. Yeah, I mean, the rest of the world is closing in, but there's just too much talent for them not to win this.
Yeah, I'm not advising panic. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm leaning more towards panic than patience. And there is no, tone the alarms down a little bit. But look, these
like a
these
baby
other
alarm, like a
countries,
tricycle alarm.
there's not a fear of Team USA from France, from Spain, from Australia, Slovenia, Nigeria. I mean, the first loss in Olympic play in 17 years, but third loss by Team USA this month. There's no question that the chemistry is an issue. The whole is not nearly as great as the sum of the parts. And also, I think it's fair to question Pop's success or relative lack thereof as the Team USA coach. He does not have an impressive track record in FIBA and international play.
But do you think, Tim, that that's because of Greg Popovich, or do you think it's just the era and time that he is coaching in?
I think it's more the era and time that he's coaching in. But, again, you can't coach Team USA like you're coaching the San Antonio Spurs. And you went through all the challenges, laid those out very well. But when you look at what Coach K did with Team USA and what Pop has done, Pop does not just get a free pass from scrutiny and criticism.
Well, Pop also didn't miss 23-pointers. So, and this is shorter. And then even the one play where Drew Holiday had an open three, like there's a France player on the ground in pain. Like, take the ball to the hole. I think what USA also has to do is be more aggressive, trying to get to the basket and get to the line. But, the one thing that helped Coach K was I was told he just let the guys play, was more of a consultant, where Pop certainly has a much more structural side of his coaching. And I've been told from people close to the team that the players have let that structure get into their head too much. And ultimately, they just got to just go play.
Yeah.
They have the talent. Just go play.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it's funny, watching that game, I had a little bit of Ty Lue's words ringing in my ear, what he kept saying to the Clippers throughout the playoffs. There would be games that they would fall into the three-point shooting because, of course, they could shoot from the three pretty well as a team. But there were so many times, and Tim, you remember in that series against Dallas, that Ty would just say, drive and kick, people, get to the paint, let's go. And that's certainly a strength of the Americans in this tournament. You want them to do more of it. That being said, the chemistry stuff you guys are talking about, certainly a factor. Drew Holiday, I believe, before playing that great game that he played, I believe he only got in, I think, at 1 a.m, just the night before. So it's pretty crazy how much this team has been thrown together. We will find out as they go ahead what they can stand up to. To give an example of the way the rest of the world is catching up and that Shaw and awe factor isn't there, our colleague Brian Windhorst noted in his print story off of last night's game, he said, look, a couple years ago during the World Championships, this French team that is basically a lot of the same guys beat Team USA, and there was hooting and hollering and craziness on the court, and that in this game yesterday, Team France basically walked off the court and were like, yeah, we expected to win. And that is a difference in the way teams are approaching facing America in this Olympic tournament. I want to get to another team in the tournament that there's no fear in the leader of that team. Luka Doncic dropped 48 points in his Olympic debut. Doncic scoring 31 in the first half of a win over Argentina, putting him on pace to break the game's scoring record of 55 points by Brazilian Hall of Famer Oscar Schmidt back in 1988. After the game, Luka said, quote, I don't care about records. We've got to win, and that's what we came here for. So, Tim, no record for him. He didn't beat the Oscar record. Right, exactly. But given what you saw from the guy you cover on a pretty day-to-day basis there, what do you think is the bigger threat to Team USA? Who in this tournament do they have to worry about? Is it Luka and Slovenia? Is it France, who they just lost to? We could throw in Australia and Spain there as well.
Yeah, I'm still going to go with France just because they just beat Team USA. They beat Team USA in 2019. That's a group of guys that have had a lot of success together, a program that has a lot of continuity, has high caliber NBA players. But Slovenia is clearly a threat because, KD would argue otherwise, and I think has a right to do so. But a case can be made that Luka is the most dominant player in this Olympic tournament.
Oh,
I said a case.
I still would go with Kevin Durant if he stays out of foul trouble. But Luka was certainly amazing yesterday. I think he's going to be in the Oscar Schmidt kind of situation, too. I don't think Oscar Schmidt ever won a medal while he was playing for Brazil. So, I mean, it's like Luka and the Miracles, right? This isn't Manu Ginobili's Argentina.
Right.
This is the Argentina that it certainly isn't a threat. So I'd like to see how he does against somebody else. But to me, the two biggest threats are France and Australia. And to me, USA's actual biggest threat is themselves. I just really feel like they're better than everybody. They're more talented. I love this cute narrative about the rest of the world catching up. No, they got the 12 best players by far. They're just not playing the way they are capable of playing. And if they do play the way they're capable of playing, I think they're capable of blowing out every team, France included.
Well,
they just don't have their chemistry right yet, and perhaps there isn't enough time, but this team is capable of beating up on everybody in this tournament.
Well, first of all, I want T-shirts. This is Luka and the Miracles. I think, Tim, you can be the one to distribute those to Luka when he gets back. I will say the rest of the world catching up. The idea is then if the U.S. is not at its best, that it's not just going to be a cakewalk, that other teams internationally are going to be there to test them and fight them. Coming up, guys, I want to save some of this from a top five. That might be a challenge for the guys for later in the week. But first, we got to get to this because, gentlemen, we are 1 week away from free agency, which means between that and the draft, it is also trade season. Ben Simmons, of course, a name that's been on the lips of a lot of front office folks around the league. In fact, Woj reporting trade talks around Simmons are expected to indeed heat up this week. So, Tim, what is the best situation for Ben Simmons? And on the flip side, your old friend Daryl Morey, in terms of the Sixers, what they want to get out of this.
The situation, the scenario that's always made sense for me is some sort of CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons framework. And they can argue about, who has to throw in what. But I think CJ McCollum would give the Sixers that scoring kind of secondary playmaking guard who could really help Joel Embiid. And I want to see Ben Simmons in more of a Draymond Green role. Stop putting him in a position where he's the primary playmaker, where he's the point guard. Let him be that secondary playmaker, that power forward with Dame Lillard, an elite, obviously deep range shooter, pick and roll player, great leader that I think could help get his confidence up. Of course, the problem there is how much longer is Dame Lillard going to be in Portland?
Mark?
Well, David Fredman, I don't know if you guys know him, a longtime NBA executive, told me once, he'd never get too high or too low about how somebody plays in the postseason. I think Ben Simmons is still a great player, will be a great player. He's in Los Angeles right now, working with a Clutch Sports appointed shooting coach. Here in the Sixers are getting a shooting coach as well. He's in good mental spirits, working on his game in LA. He didn't get a lot of time with Doc Rivers. There was no training camp, pandemic shortened season. Just throw
that in there too.
I think you got to run it back with Doc. I know Doc likes him a lot, and see what happens the second time around. I think they need more time together.
Doc didn't like him too much in his post-game press conference when they got eliminated. And Joel Embiid did not exactly indicate some eagerness to run it back.
In terms of Embiid, you don't hate on your teammate, man. I don't like that.
But he did, and it's his franchise, and we've got to recognize those as realities. Is
that the kind of leader you want to play with, though?
Listen, I'm
teammates' legs out when he has a bad series.
We can discuss blame, but I just think that it is in the best interest of all parties for Ben Simmons to be playing elsewhere sooner than later. And whether a deal that makes sense materializes now or during the season, I would be surprised if he's a Philadelphia 76er next postseason.
Okay, but that begs the question then, Tim, and I don't disagree with you that, hey, it might be nice to get that clean palette, but at what cost, right? Because Mark's right. The playoff performance Ben had, it left a taste in enough people's mouths that it's a little bit of a sell low situation. And if you're a franchise, you don't want to be in a sell low situation. So, Mark, how would you balance those things? How would you balance the idea of getting a fresh start with your team right from the beginning of training camp, if you do bring in someone else for Ben, having Ben out of there, having this new person in there, being able to work the whole season and get some cohesion for the playoffs, versus the fact that you will just probably not get the value for Ben Simmons this week that you would 3 or 4 months into the season when people have gotten the chance to see him work again and succeed the way he did during the regular season last year.
Yeah, no, the Sixers haven't had enough time to take a deep breath and really see if this is something they want to do and not make an emotional decision. I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would love to have Ben Simmons and give that maybe Ben feels like it's time for me to go and try something new. But I think people need to just calm down. I mean, this dude is still a pretty great player. He had a bad series. Have some patience with it. That's just me. I don't know. Maybe I'm an optimist.
And we're back to panic or patience again.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. And you don't want to sell for pennies on the dollar. You do need to get star value in return. And you can't, it's not about picks because you're trying to capitalize on Joel Embiid's prime, but you can't be too patient when you have Joel Embiid, one of the top 3, 5, make that argument, whatever, players in the NBA in his prime. You've got a window you've got to capitalize on. And I just think they've reached their peak with Ben Simmons as his co-star.
It'll be very interesting to see not only what move they make, but when they do it. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. You will be all over ESPN's NBA coverage all week with the draft and free agency coming up because there's like 6 teams that you are in charge of coverage for our NBA group. So thank you for your time today, and we'll see you not too long from now.
Always a pleasure.
All right, everyone else, stick with us. It's Front Office Insider Bobby Marks. Glad to have you back on the show, Bobby. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, I want to get into DeMar DeRozan with you guys because he's an unrestricted free agent. And look, free agency starts in a week. DeRozan spoke to Shannon Sharp on the Club Shay Shay podcast about what his priorities are. Here is what he said.
At this point, you gotta weigh out the opportunity of winning a championship kind of more, you know, especially with the career I had. I've been fortunate to make a lot of money. Yeah. You know what I mean? But at this point, your ultimate goal is always to compete for a championship.
First of all, shouts to the Club Shay Shay set designer, because that's a very nice setup there. But Bobby, more importantly, what are your expectations for DeMar DeRozan in free agency?
Yeah, it's funny, Rachel. He is the one player that's kind of flown under the radar as far as we've heard, certainly Chris Paul's name and Kawhi Leonard. But DeMar DeRozan has flown under the radar. And I think there's 2 schools of thoughts as far as with him. It's the teams that have cap space that are playoff teams. So now you're looking at a team like New York, potentially Miami. But if you go to New York, is that a win now situation with RJ Barrett and Julius Randle? And can you maybe get another player to come with you? And I think the most logical situation is going to be trying to work out some type of sign and trade. The last 2 years, there's been 16 players sign and trade. I would circle the Lakers as a possible destination just because it fits. It fits as far as DeRozan wanting to go back home and playing for a championship level team. I think it fits because if you're San Antonio, can you recoup maybe a Kyle Kuzma back as far as instead of losing DeRozan for nothing? And it's just a matter of if you're the Lakers, as far as we've always talked about that hard cap, right? They'd be hard capped at $143 million. And then you got to kind of put your other free agents kind of in a pecking order here. But the Lakers, for me, is probably the most logical destination for DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, add the Clippers to that, which is kind of interesting. I talked to someone close to DeMar today, and they said, look, San Antonio is still on the board, so don't count the Spurs out. But there's a lot of teams showing interest in DeMar, Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Chicago. LA is certainly attractive. I went with him to his basketball camp in Compton. He does a lot back home. His father, God rest his soul, passed earlier this year, and his mom is still in Los Angeles. So going back to LA certainly is attractive for family reasons, to get back home, to be closer to his family, and perhaps even do more in the community than he already has. But, so it ain't just the Lakers. The Clippers have some interest too.
Well, that is interesting. Remember, not so much this past season, but especially in the 2019-2020 season, we saw the Lakers and Clippers compete for a lot of players and, in fact, make a trade with each other. So that's always a little bit spicy. And certainly, DeMar has been so open about some of the struggles he has gone through, that his family has gone through. I think a lot of people would be rooting for him to go with either team, but just to be back in the LA area with his family. Very interesting to keep an eye on that. I also want to get to Bradley Beal, though, guys, because The Athletic is reporting he is mulling his future ahead of Thursday's draft. Mark, are the Wizards under pressure to get an answer from Bradley before draft night so they can kind of decide what they're doing here?
Well, I certainly think it would behoove them to know definitively what he wants to do. But I think Bradley has $181 million worth of reasons to hold tight and maybe figure everything out later. I'm told as of this morning, there has been no request, even though there's been a lot of speculation that such could take place. We're a couple days before the draft. Obviously, he would be a very, very coveted piece. you can't hurt. You hear his name even around Golden State, where they have a lot of assets to move. But as of right now, and I know he has a really good relationship with General Manager Tommy Shepard, and they're pretty open and honest with each other. No trade requests from Beal at this moment.
Yeah, Rachel, and I think the pressure on Washington was right when the season ended, right when they lost in the first round to Philadelphia, and their general manager Tommy Shepard came out and said this is not a run it back type team, right? We're not going to bring back some of the same faces that were on the roster, and they've got 5 or 6 free agents, including players like Robin Lopez, Ish Smith. So for Beal, I think the next couple weeks are going to be critical from the Wizards. It's similar to what we're going to see in Portland, right? As far as the pressure on the organizations to try to build a championship level team. And when you have Beal and Russell Westbrook making $75 to $80 million of your salary, it is going to present a challenge. And as Mark said, with that extension, he's eligible to sign a $180 million extension starting on October 1st. He can get $170 million from another team in the offseason with cap space. So there's not much of an advantage. The advantage comes with that 5 years, $235 million contract that he can sign with Washington, or perhaps if he's traded during the season with his new team.
Yeah, and that's certainly what players on other teams are going to be saying to him. Hey, you can pretty much get almost as much money with us. And we talk about Team USA and the Olympics being such strong recruiting ground. Mark, you mentioned Golden State. I don't know if during training camp, Draymond was in Bradley Beal's ear saying, hey, friend.
You know he was.
Hey,
you know he is.
Hey. Now, Bradley, of course, unfortunately went into the health and safety protocol, so he did not make the trip to Tokyo. He is not with these guys on the trip, but he was with them for 2 weeks in Las Vegas. There's a lot of names that are on a lot of teams that could use a Bradley Beal. So I don't know what conversations were happening behind the scenes. Bobby, I do want to ask you, though, you mentioned some of these contract numbers Bradley is eligible for. As Mark said, he's got 181 million reasons to stay in D.C. But what about from the D.C. side? The last Supermax they gave out was to John Wall. We saw how that worked out. They're still paying Russell Westbrook, who is on a Supermax that he signed in Oklahoma City. Are they really in position? Do they feel like they want to commit that much money to Bradley Beal for these next 5 years if Beal gives them the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, I think if Bradley Beal walked into Tommy Shepard's office today and said, I want to sign that $100 million extension, or let's play it out and I will put my name to 235, I think Tommy would give him a nice handshake agreement. And I think
and a pen.
The Supermax gets, we know the Supermax gets tricky because, Rachel, what happens is that teams are paying usually for the past, not much for what the future is. And when we saw it with Chris Paul, when we get to years 4 and 5 and you're paying a guy $45 to $50 million and maybe the production is not there, it's tough to continue to build the team. But I think if Bradley Beal gives his commitment to Washington, I think they will gladly sign on the dotted line there.
Well, the good thing with Beal is that he's still younger than a lot of people realize he is. He does have 5 years projected of production ahead of him. And it does pain me to say this because it's my hometown, but Washington, D.C. just has not been a free agent destination. So if you've got a guy like Bradley Beal, I got to think you will do everything and pay anything to keep him. Right, Mark?
And Rachel, ironically, just before the pandemic hit, a couple of weeks before, I was in San Francisco, the home of the Warriors, having lunch with Bradley Beal, doing an interview with him. And the one thing that he said is he loves Washington. He wants to have a career in Washington. He wants to have his jersey retired in Washington. He wants to be a Wes Unseld type figure with the organization. And perhaps what we just saw from Giannis sticking with it with Milwaukee could give him more motivation to stay in Washington and try to continue his legacy there.
Well, look, we've got the Giannis example on one hand. You've got Draymond Green possibly in your year during training camp. We saw what Draymond Green was able to convince Kevin Durant to do. Yeah, maybe I should. I'm trying to be responsible and say possibly, even though we all know it was pretty likely. All right, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today. You will continue to be with us as free agency approaches. We are looking forward to that. Mark, you and I are going to go into this next segment, and I wanted to show you what the Jump recommends for to the moms. Yes, I want to welcome in our draft guru, Mike Schmitz, to the show as well. Mark, let's start with you. Such a good piece. What was it like getting to know Cam a little bit more?
Yeah, he's a shy kid. He eats, sleeps, and drinks hoop, and it was good to get to know his mom, too. I'm sure there's some teams out there like, why is mom always there? Why is mom always there? But LSU coach Will Wade told me something that was really interesting. He said he would call mom and say, "Hey, I need Cam to do this. I need him to do that." And she would re-instill that in him, push him to do what the coach said and push him to do more. So another thing is he went to his first NBA game during the playoffs, that Warriors-Lakers playing game, and they were actually a couple minutes late because mom wanted him to finish his pre-draft workout that day instead of rushing to the game to see the house that Kobe built, and Kobe Bryant is his idol.
Interesting. I mean, look, I would think a parent with a military background would be a coach's dream. And we've certainly had plenty of dads involved with NBA prospects. So I do not understand why there would be extra concern about the mom. Schmitz, for those at home who haven't seen Cameron Thomas, can you describe his game?
Yeah, he's one of the best scorers in the entire draft. I mean, you don't average 23 a game as a freshman in the SEC by accident. You could put him in an NBA game tomorrow, and he would go get 20 points. I mean, he's a microwave type of guy. He has NBA move after NBA move, covers a ton of ground with his step back, which we've seen one of the most lethal moves in the NBA. I think the only question that teams have, and really the only reason he's not projected in the lottery, is what does he do when he's not scoring, right? Defensively, as a facilitator, those are areas where he still has room to improve, and teams are wondering, okay, is this Malik Monk, a guy who was really productive in college and then, has had some trouble in the NBA, or is it Buddy Hield, a guy who improved as a defender, improved as a facilitator, and now is averaging 16, 17 points a game as a starter in the NBA. So as a scorer, he's a no-brainer type of top 10 lottery talent. It's just those other areas that he's still improving.
Well, look, first of all, I will just say that of all the scout lingo you guys have, a microwave type player has always been one of my favorite. It's just so perfect. It tells you everything you need to know. I'm so interested in seeing how this young man does, because a lot of the stuff you're talking about is, of course, stuff that can be taught. I mean, court vision is a little bit more innate, but certainly defending, we have seen guys really improve after their first couple years.